Hello, dear buddies. How are you all doing? I hope everybody is learning, playing, and eating well, right? So, let me welcome you all to your most amazing platform of Physics Wala Girls. And this is your bye buddy Nikita. And together, we are preparing ourselves for your 10th standard. Okay, so I have brought to you an ultimate recap where we'll be learning about the chapter Heredity and all the concepts related to it. Okay, but the question is, ma'am, the chapter's name is Heredity and Evolution. Why only Heredity? Because a surprise and a good news for you guys that evolution has been rationalized from your syllabus. So in your exams, no question will be asked from that part, and hence we can skip it for now. But for all you curious minds, we can bring the evolution part when we complete all of these chapters. Okay? So, now let's begin that what all concepts we have to learn in this part only. So let's take a look here that first, after completing this summary lecture, you'll be able to determine what is heredity and variation, some important terms that should be on your tips, and Mendel's genetics, and finally, to determine the sex of a human. Okay, so we'll be determining sex determination, and it's a 5-star concept. So make sure that it should be on your tip. Okay, now let's start with our observations. Now, when you observe yourself in the mirror, you will see, oh God, how cute do I look, right? But then you will notice your eye color, your complexion, your hair, everything. And then you will think that, of course, my mama looks so good, I am like my mama. And of course, you will say that my father also looks good, right? So I have all these characters from my parents. Why is it so? Because we know that the human undergoes sexual reproduction. And in sexual reproduction, they will have two parents, male and a female. Now, they will form their gametes, male gamete and female gamete. And these gametes will fuse to form the zygote. And the zygote will completely develop into a new organism. And these organisms will have characters which will be a mix of both, but not equally, right? It would be a mix of maternal characters that comes from mama and paternal characters that comes from their father. But the question here is that how the offspring, the young one, the baby, how is it getting all the characters from the parents, right? Now, it is a mix of characters, right? But what exactly is getting transferred here? What exactly the parents are giving to this offspring so that the young one is looking like that? Why is my hair color and why is my hair so wavy? I always say, but why is it so? So let's take a look here and we are going to solve this mystery today. So this is about heredity and inheritance. I inherited this color of my hair, my eye color, and all the external and internal characters. Okay, though some would be different, but we will talk about that as well. Okay, so here let's take a look. That first, that inheritance is a phenomenon. Now, star mark it. This is the first term that we are talking. Okay, so inheritance is a phenomena in which the genes are transferred from parents to the offsprings. Okay, so what was getting transferred? The genes. Now, what does this gene have? So, let's see that the genes will have genetic information. They will have the genetic information that, okay, this should be of this character. This color should be of the eye. Okay, your hair would be wavy, curly, or they could be straight. So, they have all the information. And this passage of the transfer of genetic information, this entire mechanism is known as heredity. Okay, so heredity is the mechanism involved in the passage of genetic information from one generation to the next generation. Okay, so we know genes are getting transferred and these genes carries the genetic information. Okay, but how did they get the genetic information? Right? So let's talk about that the humans. We are talking about an individual. Okay? For example, let's talk about a male. It has all the sufficient genetic information of itself, of its organizational structure, of its blueprint of this entire body. But what if I have to give this information to my baby? I should have access of it, right? So the process of reproduction starts with the step one, the stage one, which is the DNA copying. Now, what happens in this DNA copying? Let's see that my genetic material will form its copy. My DNA will form its exact copy. Okay? But it's a biochemical reaction. And we know that biochemical reactions are not 100% accurate. So then what will happen? There would be chances of errors, right? Like the DNA would be copied, but not exactly same. There would be some errors. And these errors in the DNA leads to variations. That's why we do not look exactly like our mama or our papa. We resemble them, right? But we are not exactly similar to them. We are not clones of them, right? Why? Because of these variations. Okay, so here you can say we have two types of reproduction we have talked about, right? Sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. Now, asexual reproduction forms clones, right? They form identical babies. Whereas sexual reproduction, their babies can resemble their parents, right? But not our clones. So why is it so? Because of these variations. So here you can say that sexual reproduction increases the chance of variations because the genetic information comes from two different parents. Their genetic information mixes, fuses during the time of fertilization. And that's how a baby is born with different characters. Okay, now we have talked about genes were getting transferred. Now these genes are transferring what? So these genes are transferring characters. Okay, so there are two terms, characters, traits, character, traits. How do we differentiate between characteristics and traits? So let's talk about that these characters are inheritable feature. The characters will be your inheritable feature that get transferred from one generation to next generation, right? For example, your eye color, your height, okay? Now, height can also be influenced by environmental characters. Like if you're playing basketball, you'll be very tall, right? So that is also influenced. So let's write influenced by environmental characters, okay? Now, eye color would be there, hair color, hairline, facial structure, your external and internal features, right? Those are your characters. But alternate form of characters are known as traits. Alternate form of characters are known as traits. Like for example, eye color. So these eye color either could be very pretty ocean blue eyes, or it could be brown eyes, or it could be black eyes, or it could be hazel, anything. Let's talk about height as well. So some person could be very tall, or they could be dwarf, like very short as well, right? So here you can say that these are traits. Traits are the alternative form of characters. Okay, I hope these two terms are clear. Now, let's move forward to talk about these variations. Okay, now the importance of variation. What is the importance of variation? So when the variation comes, right, variation is present in the population. So if there is any unfavorable condition, in that condition what will happen? A new species can be formed. So it lays a ground of evolution, of formation of new species. Because if you have certain characters, those species will be able to survive in the new changed environment. Okay, so that leads to speciation, that leads to evolution and formation of new species. Okay, now when we talked about traits, there are two types of traits. Okay, now these traits, some can be acquired during the lifetime and some are present from the birth. Okay, like for example, our hair color. Now it would be very pretty, right, if I had some blonde or red color. I have black hair. plain black hair, and they're very wavy. They're not even curly, they're not even straight, right? So they are wavy. Now I always ask my mother that why do I have these wavy hairs just like you, just like my mother, right? Why? And these are present since birth time. Okay, I am talking about natural here. So here let's see that my hair color, my hair texture, even my eye color, my skin complexion, right? So all of that is because of my inherited traits. Inherited, that means I've got them in inheritance from my parents, right? So I've got those characters from my parents, means that these characters were expressed because of some genes. Okay, now so these were characters present from the birth, and these are transmissible. So that means if I have some children, of course they will have some of the characters of me. Okay, now let's move to the next side, and here you can see Michael Phelps. Like a salute to Michael Phelps, right? Because at such a young age, he's got 28 Olympic medals, right? So of course, he's a great swimmer. But then do you think that his babies would be born swimmers? What about babies? His babies would be born swimmers, do you think? Now, what about such great artists like musicians and dancers? Would their babies would be born dancing or singing? Is it possible? And what about if I know to cycle? And my children, would they be born cyclers? Of course not, right? Why? Because these are some intellectual things that you acquire during your lifetime. You learn to do these activities. They are not present from your birth time, and you did not get these traits from your parents, right? So these are your acquired traits. These are acquired traits. But not only that, let's talk about my ear pierced. My ears are pierced, right? That means I have a hole so that I can wear some earrings on that. Now here, talk to me about it, that will my baby will also have this ear pierced like from the time of birth? Of course not, right? Why? Because this is something that I have done, and this is something I have acquired, right? It was not present from the birth time. So this is not an inherited trait. I did not get it from my parents. Now similarly, you might have heard of the mice experiment, that if you cut the tail of mice for very many generations, like let's talk about 21 generations, but still the mice will have its tail. Why? Because that tail is not your inherited, is not your acquired character, right? The tail was always present, all right? So there is something that is inherited and the other traits which are acquired, okay? Now, when we talk about these acquired traits, we say, ma'am, we are so lazy to do anything. It would be so great if we could do everything but just lying on the sofa, on my couch, or on my bed. Right? Is it so? Of course not. So I've got this 21-day challenge for you guys, that try to do an activity. For example, I've been thinking to learn swimming. So start from day 1. Just stop thinking about one day, because one day never comes. Start from today. That's your day 1, and do it for 21 days. That's a challenge. You will trick your brain to do that activity that you don't like or that you've been thinking to do. And if you do it for 21 days successfully, your brain will develop to do that thing, and you have got yourself a habit. You've got yourself a hobby there. So anything is possible. Stop procrastinating now and just do that thing for 21 days, and you can achieve anything. You can trick your brain to do anything. Just do for 21 days. Okay? Now, let's talk about some important terms before diving into the Mendelian genetics. Okay? So, for that, we have a cell. Alright? Now, the cell will have a nucleus. Now, this nucleus will have scattered material. Okay? So, let's zoom into this scattered material and let's see what it is. So, here we have got your DNA. Okay, this is your DNA. Now, what is DNA? DNA is the genetic material of humans. Alright? Now let's talk about this full form of DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. Now here, let's take a look. So this DNA, we know that DNA gets transferred from the parents to their offsprings, right? Now, let's see that not all the DNA is useful. Only some part of it, okay? So let's see that segment of the DNA or those segments of DNA that will code for a character, that will code and express itself to form a character is known as gene. So now it is clear what is a gene, okay? Now, let's see that this gene, so in the form of DNA, this gene is only getting transferred now. That's why we are getting those characters. So let's see what is happening here. Now, we know that this scattered material in the form of a thread was chromatin. But at the time of reproduction, cell will divide, right? So what will happen? This chromatin fibers comes very close to each other. They will condense to form a rod-like structure. And this rod-like structure is known as chromosome. The rod-like structure are known as chromosomes, okay? But let's talk about humans. So humans have 23 pairs of chromosome. That sums about to be 46. So half of it comes from mama, okay? That means maternal side from the female, and the other half of it comes from the father, that means the paternal side, okay? So that's why the DNA was copied, right? So that half of it would be transferred to the offspring. Now, come back here. So what happened next was that 23 chromosome came from mama and 23 from papa. Alright, now let's see that if you combine these 23, they would form 23 from mama and 23 from papa, they would form structures like these, and they would be structurally same. Also, at the same location, they have the genes that will code for one similar character. Like for example, at this position, they are coding for hairline. They are expressing for hairline. Okay. So such a pair of chromosome that is structurally similar and at the same location have genes for one character. Those chromosomes are known as homologous chromosome. Those chromosomes are known as homologous chromosome. Okay. Now, let's move forward to talk about these homologous chromosomes. Alright. So, here you can see these homologous chromosomes have certain locations that will have similar genes, similar form of a gene. Okay. So, that is known as your alleles. Two alternate form of a gene which is obtained from each parent, that is known as alleles. Okay. Now let's suppose that my father has blue eyes and my mama has black eyes. But how will we determine that what will be my eye color? What will be my eye color? Right? So for that, they have a solution for it. See, the alleles are of two types, dominant allele and recessive allele, right? Of course, we know at our homes also, we are also having some dominant partner and a recessive partner, right? For example, mama rules at our homes, right? So she's the dominant part. So here we can say that the dominant allele is that which masks the expression of other allele. Dominant allele will mask the expression of other alternated allele of the gene. Okay, and it is always represented with capital letter. So for example, I'm writing here, it is always represented by a capital letter. Okay, whereas we have another type of allele, another form of an allele, and that is your recessive allele whose expression is masked by the other alternative allele. That means you can say that the dominant allele will mask the recessive allele, and it is written in a small letter. Okay. Now, we have got to know that there are two forms of a gene and we have two chromosomes. Okay, so that means that two genes would be there, right? Two genes come together, that will form a character. All right, so here you can say that if we want a plant to be tall, it would have two genes, right? Two genes, and that could be either it could be tall. Capital T to capital T, that means that is dominant, right? Because capital T is dominant, everything is dominant. So here the plant would be tall. But if, let's suppose, we have capital T and small t, what would be the nature of the plant here? We know capital T is dominant and small t is recessive. That means dominant will mask the effect of recessive, right? So here it would also be a dominant trait will mask the effect of recessive and the plant would be tall here. But what if we have small t, small t? Now, of course, this small t is actually recessive. Both of them are recessive. So what will happen? That of course now they have to express because no other dominant allele is there to mask them. So here they can freely express and form a dwarf plant. Now they will express itself, right? Now there is no predator. They can express themselves, okay? So here in the absence of dominant allele, what will happen? The dwarf, the recessive alleles will express itself, okay? So then let's talk about, there are three conditions that we have seen, right? Three cases. So if it's capital T, both of them are dominant alleles, or small t, both of them are the recessive alleles. That means both the genes are similar, right? Both the genes are same. So this condition is known as your homozygous condition, right? That means they will have both the same genes. Whereas you can see that here at this capital T, small t, when the dominant masks the effects of recessive, right? There are two different genes. Different, that means those plant would be heterozygous. Okay, so that would be heterozygous. That means different, two different genes. Okay, now one more thing to notice here, that the physical character, the character or trait that we are talking about here is known as the phenotype. So here tall, dwarf, right? Those would be the phenotype. That is your phenotype. Now this phenotype is formed in favor from the genes, the alleles, right? So they are using a unique set of genes for the formation of that trait, for the formation of that phenotype. So that unique set of gene is your genotype. So here let me try it. Capital T or capital T small t or small t, those are the unique set of genes and they are known as the genotypes. Okay, they are known as the genotypes. I hope it's clear so far. All right, now we have talked about alleles. Let's begin. We have talked about all the important terms. So now it's time to begin with Mendel's genetics. Of course, a huge salute to Sir Mendel as well, right? Why? See, Mendel was doing his work. He goes from place to place. So he was a monk basically. Okay. Of course, he had a huge family. He left the family so that he could work on himself. And because he was such an intellectual that he observed things. He used to observe things. Okay. But the most important part was that along with his science, his work, his observations, he added maths. So it was going on with science, but then he added maths to it as well, some statistics. And then voila, all of his experiments then came up with a conclusion. Okay, so before Mendel also many people tried to do this, but Sir Mendel won. But did you realize that he became father of genetics after he died? So the first father to be formed after death. Okay, Okay, coming back here, just kidding. So here, let's talk about first, what is genetics that I was talking about. So all the things that we have been studied so far, genes, alleles, variations, transfer of genes, transfer of characters, all of that is genetics. That means genetics is the study of heredity and variations. Okay? And Mendel is known as the father of genetics. Mendel came to be known as father of genetics. Okay, his experiments were successful. Why? Because he used science with statistics. He used mathematics to prove his conclusions. Okay, then first of all he started experimenting on mice. But then later he said that this isn't working. So then he took a plant, and in that he started experimenting. The experimenting model was pea plant. The garden pea plant, you can write, okay? So the experimental model was garden pea plant, which is known as Pisum sativum. Now, why did he choose this plant? See, there was an advantage to choose this pea plant here. Why? Because first of all, it's a bisexual plant. That means it has both the flowers, the male and the female. The flowers would be bisexual. Both the parts, male reproductive system and female reproductive system, will be there in one single plant. And this plant was annual. It has a short life cycle. And it showed different characters too. So that was very easy. He said it's easy to work on this, and the conclusions I will get very soon, right? So then he chose this pea plant. Of course, every decision was based on some eligibility criteria. And pea plant was found eligible because it was easy to experiment and the conclusions would be generalized. Okay? So, he chose this garden pea plant and then started experimenting. Now, this pea plant has very different characters. So, he chose 7 different characters, but not all of them at the same time. So, what did he do? First, he started with just one character at a time. Okay? So, for that, he decided that I will have a tall plant and a dwarf plant. Okay? But how is it possible that this tall plant would be there and it should be homozygous? So, what did he do? He mated the plant so that the plant for generations, so that this plant will only give tall plants and this will only give dwarf plants for generations. And that's how he picked the parent plant and then did the cross between them one at a time. And that came to be known as the monohybrid cross. Okay? So what happened? Monohybrid cross is a cross which studies the one character at a time. Okay, so he took the parent plant. The parent plant was homozygous. That means tall and dwarf. Now, what did he notice here? So, let's see that when these two plants were when these two plants were mated, they will notice that the offspring formed in the first generation. The offspring formed in the first generation, which is known as filial generation. Okay. So, in the first generation, they've got a tall plant. Very easy. Of course, we know that the dominant would prove itself. The dominant would show itself and it would form a tall plant. Yes, we know that. So, what did he do? Now, he got the tall. After mating the tall with the dwarf, he got a tall plant. But he did not stop there. He wanted to self it. Self means now he got the tall plant, this tall plant. Okay. And then he selfed it. That means it mated with itself. With this genotype, he mated it with itself. Then what happened? So to his surprise, what did he notice here? What did he expect? He expected that the tall plant crossed selfed it with the tall plant. They should get all the tall plants. But to his surprise, he got 3 tall. You can see 3 tall. And 1 dwarf plant. 1 dwarf plant. Okay. So this was the phenotypic ratio. Phenotypic ratio, that means the trait ratio, that he got 3 tall plants with 1 dwarf plant. So that was phenotypic ratio that came about to be 3:1. 3 tall, 3 dominant, but 1 recessive trait as well. Okay. Then he decided, used mathematics and statistics. So then he reached a conclusion that this might only happen if this is first filial generation was heterozygous. That means if only it is capital T small t, then only there would be 1 dwarf plant present. Okay, let's try to do it as well. So for example, we have got the pure parents. This was tall and this was dwarf, right? So here you can say this was dwarf. They are pure parents that we have. Okay, now this will give the, of course, the alleles have to segregate, right, to form the gametes. So here they will only form T, capital T gamete, and here the gamete formed is small t. Now these gametes will fuse to form a zygote, the offspring, the embryo, and that would be capital T small t. Alright, of course, because they were pure. But when the pure is mated with the dwarf, what will happen? The tall, when mated with the dwarf, what will happen? They will form this. But since it has a dominant allele, what will happen? This would be tall plant. And this is your first filial generation. But then he didn't stop there, right? So what happened? He selfed it. After selfing, what did he get? Let's see. Now we have capital T, 2 gametes, right? Capital T, small t. We are selfing it. So we have capital T, small t here. Let's draw the Punnett square. Alright. Now what will happen? First, capital T will mate with the capital T. The 2 gametes. What are the ratios? Probability we are asking, right? So capital T will mate with capital T, or capital T will mate with small t. Here, small t will mate with capital T, or small t with small t, right? So let's suppose, what would be the conclusion here? Both the dominant alleles, of course, the plant would be tall. Heterozygous, but 1 dominant allele is there. So what will happen? Here would also be tall. Here, of course, same condition, heterozygous condition, 1 dominant is there, which will mask the effect of recessive. So of course, tall. But both of them are recessive alleles. That means here the plant would be dwarf. So this could only happen if this is the F2 generation, right? In the F2 generation, you can only get a dwarf plant when in the first generation you will have a heterozygous. Heterozygous, that means both of them, they will have 1 dominant and 1 recessive allele. Okay, so this was the monohybrid cross. The phenotypic ratio, which is very important, right? The phenotypic ratio 3:1. And for monohybrid cross, the genotypic ratio is also very important. What is the genotypic ratio? Genotypic ratio is that ratio of the set of genes that codes for the phenotype, right? So here let's see that 1 was capital T, 1 was small t, but there were 2 that were capital T, small t. So this is their genotypic ratio, which is 1:2:1. This is their genotypic ratio. Very important. Please note the phenotypic and genotypic ratio of monohybrid cross. Okay. Now, he did not stop there. Now, he was getting conclusions, right? And it was getting proved because of maths as well. He could prove them. Statistics was also coming to be right, in all the plants. So then, why only 1 character? So then he took 2 characters, okay? And that cross of, when we are studying 2 characters at one time, that cross is known as dihybrid cross. And he took in those, first he took the seed color and the seed shape. So those were the 2 traits that he used, 2 characters. Those were the 2 characters that he chose for a dihybrid cross. Okay. Now, the seed color. Here you can see the seed color would be either green or yellow. The seed shape. The seed could be either round or wrinkled. Right? So again, what did he do? He crossed both of them by studying two characters at one time. Okay? So in the F1 generation, he got the heterozygous offspring. But then when he selved it, he got the different conditions here. Okay? And here, the phenotypic ratio came about. PR means phenotypic ratio. It came about to be 9:3:3:1. And this is the phenotypic ratio of a dihybrid cross when you study two characters at one time. Okay? And it is very, very important. So that's all about Mendel's genetics. But then, a very important concept, that from all these crosses, what did Mendel conclude? Because we did not know anything about it, right, so far. So what did he conclude? So he made some laws out of it. Out of both the crosses, he had made some laws. And those laws were first law of dominance. So he said that when two alternative form of characters are present in an individual, only one character will express itself. Right? Of course, we know for one character there are two genes coding, right? Of both the homologous chromosomes, right? So what will happen here? Only one will express in the F1 progeny. For example, if it was capital T, small t, only one would be expressed, and that was a dominant allele. So he gave the law of dominance, and the dominant allele will mask the effect of recessive allele, right? So dominant trait will mask the effect of recessive trait, and therefore it will be the phenotype would be the dominant trait. Okay. Next, law of segregation. Remember, we form the gametes. So this law states that first, the inheritance, this law explains that a pair of alleles have to separate from each other. The pair of alleles, like for example, if it's capital T, small t, it has to separate from each other to form capital T, small t. Capital T will form two gametes, right? Capital T and capital T. Okay? So these alleles have to separate from each other. Alright? This was law of segregation. Then he came with law of independent assortment that was concluded from the monohybrid or dihybrid. Let's understand the law first. So, this law states that if you study the two characters, both the characters would be independent of each other. Okay? For example, the seed is round or wrinkled. Doesn't interfere with if the seed is green or yellow. Right? So the seed color is independent of the seed shape. And that is law of independent assortment. Okay? That the alleles of two more genes get sorted into gamete independent of each other. Okay? So here these were the laws. And of course, the law of independent assortment was concluded from the dihybrid cross. Okay? So these were the law of Mendel's. Now, we are moving forward to the last concept, and that is very important, which is your sex determination in humans. We have studied a lot of it, right? Like eye color, hair color, hairline, what would be our color. But then, how would we determine the sex, the gender? That, oh, nice baby. But if this baby would be a girl or a boy, can we determine it before its birth? Of course we can. Okay? So, let's talk about in genetics terms. Okay? So, here you can say that humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and a 23rd pair, the last pair of chromosome, will help you determine the gender of the offspring. Okay? Now, how? Let's take a blank slide and talk about it. Okay? So, here do you know that male, the 23rd pair that we are talking about. Okay? And here we have the female. So, the male have both the alleles like X and Y, whereas females have only one, that is X and X, one type of allele. Okay? Now, let's talk about, so after their segregation, the male will have two gametes, X or Y, whereas after female segregation, they will have X or X. That means only one kind of it, right? Now, let's draw the Punnett square. Here we have the Punnett square. So here we are taking the female. This side is of a female and this is of a male. Now female can only form an X, right? There is only one X, so we will write only X. Okay, we will write only X here. And here male can form two, right? Two gametes. So here it would be X or Y. Now when we see the cross here, you will notice that either it could be XX or it could be XY. So the offspring could either have XX or XY. And the offspring that have XY would be a boy, and the offspring that would have XX in the chromosome, that would be a girl. And the probability, can you see that the number of the girls, it could be same. The probability would be same for the girls and the boys. So the formation of a girl or a boy is 50%. The probability will be 50%. But who is responsible for the gender? See, the female could only give one chromosome, right? That is of X. It has only X allele. But then when we talk of the male, it has two kinds. If it transfers Y, it would be a boy. If it transfers X, it would be a girl. That means father is responsible for the gender of the offspring. So to kill all the taboos, please understand that the father is responsible for the gender of the child. Okay? So here you will notice that the males has X and Y as sex chromosome, and while crossing, if a male X chromosome, it crosses with the female sex chromosome, then what will happen? There will be a formation of a girl. But if the male's Y chromosome crosses with female's X chromosome, that would result in the formation of a boy. Okay? So with this, we have come towards the end of the session. I hope all the concepts are clear to you guys. So take care of yourselves, and I shall see you in the next class. So till then, take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.